the operators in there were sending calls all over the hospital.
Broke in.
It's not that way anymore, of course.
Then I get other calls about somebody places in the middle of the night and they call in like, well, I heard on the CV that you're about two farms down. I'm just stuck over, I got something else to say, like, I wouldn't have had to go except that they knew I was gonna be there.
We're still working on the handout. Anybody need one? Do that, or anything?
Sorry, yeah. I got the. Now you're stupid.
No, I think I have less.
Okay, everybody need a Bible. Okay, good, you know where they are.
Remember my rock museum teacher?
You use the same website?
Yes.
Expedia, the same, I mean. Yeah, I see, so much position.
Yeah, that's not me. And I thought, I don't want to say this week.
Well, as you can see, we've changed the viewing, so those who don't want to be on the screen can sit.
Yeah.
So we got that Zoom thing working. I think that works. Now, those who are viewing and aren't able to see using the class, but. Okay, we've been working on the handout of the I am in John, and we're going over the they go me, that's the Greek, and the pronoun I is added, but the pronoun I in the verb form is implied. So I think what John's doing, because he uses this phrase 46 times in the Gospel of John, he's emphasizing the pronoun I along with I am, because we talked about how Matthew uses this phrase once, ego, a me, and then 4 times he uses just a me, because the pronoun I is implied here. So in the 4 of the 5 times Matthew has Jesus says I am, he leaves out the initial pronoun. And then the pronoun is implied. And I don't know if some of you have studied languages where that's the case. We don't really have that in English, but it's true in Greek, it's also true in Hebrew, and where a verb form, you know, if you conjugate the form, it's he said, she said, you singular, masculine said, you singular, feminine said, and then it might be I said, and then it goes into the plural. How did I start that? We said, you said, you said. And so in Hebrew and Greek, you might have that pronoun added to it, or you might not, because it's embedded in the verb form. Now, we said Matthew uses this phrase 1, maybe 5 times. Luke 2 times, Mark 2 times, and again, I said Mark 46. So that's what we're trying to figure out. And why does John use it 46 times? And of 7 of those 46 times, he uses significant symbolic language, like, and we dealt with, so it's an I am statement, just not Jesus saying I am. Like he's working on the water and the disciples are afraid, so he just says I am. Basically, he's saying it's me. Don't be afraid. But there are 7 statements where he says, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. And the one we dealt with last time, or finished up with last time, is I am the gate, or I am the door. Now, he's not talking about a door to a house. He's talking about a gate or a door to a sheep corral or a sheep enclosure. And then and so let's turn to chapter 10. What is it? Verse, I think it's,
Gate number 7.
yeah, so then we want to go to I am the good shepherd, yeah. So we start with 10 verse 11. So he says, I am the gate to the sheepfold, and he's stressing there, when he says, I am the door, I am the gate, that, that's where the sheep and the shepherd enter. They don't cut a hole, they don't, in the fence, they don't come in through the back door, or they don't jump over the fence, they come in through the gate. That's the way you get there. And then he just, goes, he really, just takes this metaphor a bit further and says, I am the good shepherd. And if you read those several verses, and you can go beyond 14, but if you read those verses, he's basically contrasting himself with the hired hand, or the good shepherd versus the hired hand. And you see that? 10, 11, 12. What does the good shepherd do, and what does a hired hand do? What's the difference when it comes to security of the sheep?
He abandons them.
Yeah, when danger comes, the hired hand, you know, I don't get paid enough.
Yeah.
$8.50 an hour? No,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna. I took that, a quote from a movie, what was it? Denzel Washington movie. Security guard says, I don't get paid enough, so, I'm not putting my life on the line for that. But Jesus says the good shepherd does. So when trouble comes, the wolf comes, the good shepherd is there. He's at risk, but he's going to take on that risk. Now, if you go down to verse 16, Jesus then talks about, and sometimes, and we'll talk about this as we move through. Sometimes I think, well, sometimes we interpret John as being exclusive when he's using some of these metaphors. But in this case, we might make an argument that he's being inclusive. If we look at 10:16. Of course, we might make a case for either one, but he's saying there's more than one flock, and
Oh, yeah.
I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold, and I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice, so there will be one flock, one shepherd. So you could make an argument that he's being inclusive here. There are other people either that haven't met Jesus or people who are just outside of the fold, and they're going to be part.
Yeah, mine says that are not of this sheep pen. I think that's kind of cool. We don't live here. We don't, but
And you have the NIV, no? Yes.
yes.
Okay. Yeah. Mine says fold. What is that fold? Anybody
Well,
else?
the first time it says fold, the second time it says flock.
Yes, I have that as well. Karen, when you get to the end of
says flock.
16, there will
Yeah.
be one flock, so. Well, belong to this fold pen, obviously, the NIV is referring to the corral itself.
Mhm.
And then, I think I didn't bring my Greek Bible here this morning, so I can't check it. guessing it's the same word, but I can't say for sure.
Yeah. For sure.
But then when you get to the end, I think it's talking about the flock as, as sheep. So any questions about these two? I am the door, I am the shepherd. I don't plan to spend a lot of time on this unless you have questions.
It was a stupid question. I say you saw Jake Googling. Oh, I didn't know sheep was called a flock. I was confused why they were using a word flock with a bunch of sheep. I thought it was a herd of sheep.
Flock, fold, or herd can all be used for sheep.
Sorry.
Well,
Sorry.
in the Hebrew, I mean, it's used very frequently, so when you ask that question, because I read Hebrew a lot, it's just flock is sheep and goats,
Just makes me think of birds.
and then,
Goats are herding.
okay, flock of birds, yeah.
Yeah, not flocks.
But then when they use the word herd, they're referring to cattle. What else? Yeah, those are, and Hebrew just makes that distinction, all the time, so it's, so.
The annotation here is that indicates that Jesus is not making Jews out of them, but inviting people into his new movement. So it all sounds very universalist, universalist. You know, in the end, we're all gonna be one big happy family.
Yeah, yeah, and, when we get into, well, some parts of Matthew and Luke, and then certainly when we get into Acts, because, and you gotta remember, John probably was the last gospel written, so there's a time when, this movement of Jesus, it starts within the Jewish community, but then, especially when Paul gets involved, it starts to take off. I mean, Paul's the missionary to the Gentiles, and he's the missionary to Asia Minor, and to Greece and so forth. So that's where I need to be picked up on the thought where I think John is being inclusive here.
But isn't there a clarifier or a divider point in that my sheep know my voice? Meaning there are sheep that don't know his voice?
Yeah, I mean, so that's.
It's the second half of 16, they too will listen to my voice.
And
Well, the
that,
people who he does not currently lead, but they too will listen to my voice.
and that starts back with just the one flock. I mean, I think that's back early. Chapter 2, or not chapter, verses 2 and 3. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. But, and I don't know enough about sheep, but do they respond to a verbal voice? I mean,
Watching Trina and Lainey now.
Oh, there we go, yeah.
Sheep experts.
I mean, do they, is your experience similar to what they're saying here? I mean, do they respond to your voice like that? And would they recognize your voice as opposed to mine if they never saw me?
I don't know, I mean, if you said their name, they probably can,
Right.
I don't know.
But he wouldn't know their name. Because he's not the shepherd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You go and, huh?
This isn't encouraging, but we had sheep years and years ago. And Paul said, I think these are the dumbest animals that God created.
I was gonna say,
Cows are pretty
you had
dumb
a
too.
bucket of grain and they would follow the grain, but
Yeah.
I don't think.
Yeah.
So this might not be accurate, and this could be just metaphorical. Right, we're trying to get at this, is this how it actually works? And,
Maybe they just had really cool sheep back then.
Or they had lesser herds and they knew the sheep better. Who knew?
it could be, yeah.
This annotation I think is interesting, where it
Go
says,
ahead.
people tend to want to restrict God's blessings to their own group, but Jesus refuses to be limited by the fences we build. And I like that, the fences, when mine talks about a pen, but those fences, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of.
Fences, walls, I mean, if we wanna
Yes,
take, because this is, you know, not a lot of us deal with sheep, it's
Right.
not some,
Right.
but,
We raise our hands in this room.
Yeah.
Okay.
You guys
Well-
call them flocks of sheep?
Yeah, flocks.
Man.
See, when I, teach a class like this
Yeah.
in a more suburban setting, like in Phoenixville, it's like, they think that sheep imagery is antiquated. Well, there's no, we don't deal with that. Well, somebody does. I mean, you know, when we get wool and people in Scotland or whatever,
Yeah.
somebody said, what's that wool sweater you're wearing? Where did that come from?
Is this where the analogy of Jesus being the Lamb of God, is that where that comes from?
I don't think so. I mean,
Isn't that version of it because he's a sacrifice?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
oh, I see what you're saying, because he's a good shepherd. See, he's not the lamb,
It's not the Lamb.
but it could start here because he is gonna lay down his life for the sheep. But there are, I think the lamb though is heavily used in the book of Revelation. I don't think Jesus as the lamb is universal or used as much in other passages in the New Testament, but with that, I'd have to delve into that a little bit more, but it's, you know, that's, Jesus as the lamb is pretty strong in the book of Revelation. I think a lot of the songs, the contemporary Christian songs, they really picked up on Jesus
Oh,
as the lamb
Peggy's
of God.
in.
And, thank you.
You're sitting there.
Not looking.
No, I got it.
I just happened to notice.
Okay, Peggy, you should be with us. I apologize. I don't know how long you've been up there. If you unmute.
Oh, that's okay. We're just having a wonderful time here with no water and now our heat's going bonkers.
Oh,
That's great.
What's all that about?
Well, Tuesday we woke up, well, I came home from teaching and Ken said we didn't have water.
Okay,
So Morton's came out, they fixed our pressure tank, but then they got the pump out of the well, but couldn't put it back in. Something shifted.
oh,
So we
right.
had somebody come out and check with the camera and he thought he could do it because Myers has done work in our neighborhood. But then the casing collapsed. So we're looking at 2 to 3 weeks before we get water.
oh my goodness.
My.
So this, yeah, that's a long time. This is a recurring problem. It's not connected to the storm, obviously, but,
No, this is, well, yeah,
the storm may not.
no. So now we woke up with the heat in the house way up and we don't know what's going on there.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us and, stay warm, stay cool.
Oh, yeah, we're staying warm. I don't have my normal layers on.
Right,
Ah,
okay. Yeah, they need to read. Okay, so where were we? Karen's the one who noticed you were in the waiting room, so thank Karen for that. See, no one else was. Where were we? You were talking about your annotation?
Lamb of God, I think. or
Oh, yeah, we
something.
were talking about the lamb
Oh,
of
yeah.
God and the sacrifice, yeah.
Okay, well. We ready to move on to the next one? And the next one is I am the resurrection, chapter 11. And I think I'm gonna have us just go to the statement itself, 25 to 26. Yeah, I got it. Okay, what happens, and we talked about this, this is one of the signs, this is one of the miracles. That Jesus performs. And it's, well, it's the raising, this chapter 11 is the story of, raising Lazarus from the dead. So, Lazarus has died. Jesus and his disciples are someplace else. They go, and it's almost as if he purposefully delays. He delays his arrival on purpose. Then he gets there because people, Lazarus has already been bound. He's in some kind of tomb, and he's having a conversation with Martha. And Martha says, if you had been here, Lazarus would not have died. And then this is when he says, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? And she says, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. Then, he says a brief prayer, and then, so he says, I am the resurrection and the life. And then he says a brief prayer, and then he calls for Lazarus to come out. And he does. He says, roll that stone away, Lazarus, you come out of there. And he's moving around, and they say, he says, unbind him and let him go. Let him go. I always have a picture of that in my head, and I don't think this is what the text means, but you unbind, if you're kind of tied up, you're unbound, and then you run. And I have this picture, let him go, so I can see Lazarus running all around the yard. Yeah, I'm alive. That's always whenever I hear Jesus say, unbind him and let him go. It's like having a dog, you take the leash off of the collar and just run. So that's the image that I have.
The image I have is wondering how he walked out while his hands and feet were all bound up.
Right, yeah, how did he walk out of that? Probably wouldn't have been, well, the hands, but his feet might not have been.
It says feet were wrapped with strips of linen.
Okay,
Hands
yeah.
and feet were wrapped with.
Well, all right.
Maybe they were
Cloth
together.
around his face, how did he
They were-
see?
Yeah. Probably not.
So I have a question, another rabbit hole, but Mary and Martha.
Yeah,
Am I correct in thinking that they were friends with Jesus even before they thought of him as the Messiah, or did they just meet him, after he was declared the Messiah in their circle?
oh, well, it's probably somewhere in there somewhere, but, I think it's in Mark. I don't think it's here. It's in Mark where we have the story of the comparison of Mary and Martha. And
Right.
Jesus was with them. And
I
so,
think I've read that somewhere, that they were good friends.
well, well, then that would be a conjecture, right? See, here we have to go back to my saying is, what does the text say? So then we have to look at all the text and say, and compare them and say, okay, how close was Jesus? But he was, at their house. And when you know that story where, Martha's busy in the kitchen or wherever, and Mary's at Jesus' feet, and then, the church has typically said, well, we need, Marthas who are doing behind the scenes work, and we need Marys who are gonna,
The reason that thought came up is that in this text, Jesus asks Martha, do you believe that I am the resurrection? And questions her, and she says, yes. And I'm thinking, yeah, it's kind of unusual. If you're really good friends with somebody and you know them from infancy
Oh.
up, that oftentimes you don't think of them as being anything overly special.
Right.
Because I think that is so true. I've seen it over and over in my own
Yeah, I know
lifetime.
what you're saying.
It's like, there's some reference to that too, that Jesus, I think, would have said that you're not ever recognized in the town.
Yeah, and that's in Luke chapter 4, where he's quoting Isaiah 61. And
So it's
he
just-
makes these big claims about himself, and they say, look, we knew you when you were in diapers,
Right,
you know, you're
exactly.
standing up here.
Who is this?
So, yeah, who is it? So, yeah, I don't know that that's, yeah, obviously that's not going on here, but I think if you read this, chapter 11, and then read some other passages in some of the other gospels, this presupposes a previous relationship. I mean, this isn't,
Right,
Jesus
because,
knows Lazarus
Right.
in the beginning, it's his friend, I think, and he weeps.
Right.
And verse 5 says, so although Jesus loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days. So that speaks of a relationship. He loved them.
And Martha and her sister and Lazarus, yeah. Yeah, so there was this presupposes a previous relationship. And so we don't know, I mean, it could be the relationship started as they started following Jesus, and then he just got close to them. I don't know that we can say that he had a relationship with them before he started doing all the miracles. We just don't know that. I don't think
yeah,
we can.
because
We can't say he didn't, we can't say he did.
but they might have been from the same area.
It's possible, and it's possible they did know each other. Maybe he grew up with them, but I don't think the text addresses it.
It wasn't a necessary rabbit hole, but I just.
Well, it brings in Mary and Martha, yeah. Okay, so, now what's important about this is compared to I am the door and I am the shepherd. And then we want to compare this with, well, I'll do that in a second. Again, Jesus, or John is, connecting very clearly the I am the resurrection and the life. He's connecting that with, a sign that he's about to perform. And so we see John do this. He doesn't do it with all of the I am statements. He didn't do it with I am the door or I am the good shepherd. There was no connection to that, to one of the 7 miracles that he performs in John. But when he says I am the bread of life, a few verses before that, that's when he feeds the 5,000 with bread and some fish. And when he says, I am the light of the world, then he makes that mud pie, Jacob, and heals the blind man. I am the light of the world to someone who's blind. So John does, in at least 3 occasions, he does connect these I am statements to the signs, and I think that's intentional, and that's where I say the chapters from 1 to 12 are, in my mind, more elaborate and more cohesive and connected than maybe we might first think just reading through John. John's very intentional, I think, in connecting the signs and the I am statements, and all of this points back to Jesus wanting to tell the crowd, the Jewish leaders, and the disciples who he is. He is with God. So it all goes back to chapter 1, where John starts by equating Jesus and God, But then John, he wants to take as many opportunities as he can to, have Jesus explain who he is. That's one of the reasons he performs the 7 miracles or the 7 signs, because that gives him an opportunity to say who he is. And so he, feeds the 5,000. And then he says, I'm the bread of life. And we talked about that. That gets into a long discussion. He talks about he's the living bread, and then talks about eating of his flesh and drinking of his blood. It
They
gets in-
there? I wonder if they're
Yes.
still in the car.
Yeah.
Hey, Peggy, if you get a chance, go ahead and mute yourself. Oh, that's all right, she might not be there.
We'll see. I can mute her if she,
That's right, we should be able to do that.
I gotcha.
Thank you.
Is that mouse sensitive?
Got it.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. So, yes, we can do that. So, I think I look at the first chapters of John as some kind of literary masterpiece. It all comes together, and that's why we spend some time with the signs and with, the I am statements. Okay, now we're going to get to one that I think will probably, provoke some discussion. And it's one that might be a challenge to us. And this is 14. And it's 14 verse 6, but I want us to, start with verse 1. This is a passage that I have used, and I've heard others use it in funeral settings, and you'll know in a minute. And then it's also a passage that has been used quite a bit in the church for other reasons, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house, there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go and prepare a place for you? And this is one reason why it's used in funeral settings, because, we think there's a place for us in God's house. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself. So where I am, there you may be also. And you know the way to the place where I'm going. And then Thomas says, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way? And this is the setting the stage for this I am statement. Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you know me, you will know my Father also, and from now on, you do know him and have seen him. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And so, the first part of this passage, because of the house or the mansion and the many rooms, we have used this passage in funeral settings, but we've also used verse 6. Church traditionally has used this in an exclusive way, that the only way you can get to God is through Jesus. Now, don't forget the inclusive nature we found in chapter 10, because we have to remember who is saying this. This isn't Matthew, Mark, or Luke. It's John. And this takes us back to chapter 1, where Jesus and God are one. So Jesus says, we can reverse it and see what you think about that. You might not like it. No one comes to the Father except through me. And Jesus could say, no one comes to me except through the Father, because they're one. And John has made that clear right from the beginning. So I don't think, or at least I'm questioning whether John meant to be as exclusive in this passage. I think there is an exclusive element to it, but I'm not sure he meant to be as exclusive as the church has interpreted. Because, a lot of times this verse is just taken out by itself. And maybe out of context, because you have to keep it in the context of John. This isn't Matthew, this isn't Mark or Luke, this is John, who from this, from the previous 13 chapters has said, he and Jesus are one. If you look at 5:23, you can look it up if you want, I'm just gonna read it. Anyone who does not honor, I got it right, who does not honor the Son, does not honor the Father who sent him. And then in 8:19, and this is in a more negative sense to the Jewish leaders, you know neither me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would also know my Father. And then in 10:38, so that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I in the Father. So we have this connection of Jesus and God. John sets it up in chapter 1, but then he brings it through the rest of the gospel at times, and he brings it here. And so I'm getting into this a little bit because the church historically has used this to say Jesus is the only way. And for those of us who are Christians, we get to God through Christ, and we are Christ's followers. But is John being as exclusive as sometimes the church interprets that? So
Right,
I'm gonna, let that open.
I was recently at a funeral at Myerstown Church of the Lord. And members of the family, it was not so much an honoring of her life as it was a evangelical call or whatever. I mean, members of the family got up and said, it does not matter what you're doing, you have to believe in Jesus as the only way to get into heaven, which feels very uncomfortable to me. I don't like that, okay, I believe in Jesus, so it doesn't matter what I do. That is not how it feels to me.
Right.
And then my sister she goes to Lancaster Church of the Brethren, and I forget, what's Fitzky's first name? Don. He spoke just like 2 weeks ago on this passage, and he focused on the verse 12, where anyone who has faith in me will do what I have been doing, that Jesus is the way. Jesus has been showing us the way to live. He's viewing it as, and to me, as different, not the way, the path, but the way, the demonstration of how to live. And to me, that makes a lot more sense than the path, and it doesn't matter what you're doing. I thought that was an interesting way to view. I never thought of it that way. The way would have two different meanings, but yeah.
Yeah.
I can remember Don Fitzkey saying once years ago.
At Chickies.
Do you remember this? That the old brethren going back would have believed that upon death that you may have a second chance to enter.
Alexander Mack said that. I have a book where he puts that, he says that,
So that ruffled a lot of feathers.
Yeah.
Chickies, oh my goodness.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, there is a second chance, but if you Do any of you have a copy of the Brethren Encyclopedia? Do you know what that is? There will be an article of universalism in there, and the early brethren
Yeah.
were, and this may be different from the Universalist Church, but universalism was, they believed in some way, somehow, some form, that God was open to everyone in the end.
Yeah.
How all that worked,
Yeah.
they didn't
Yeah.
come up with a plan or scheme, because you can't. And we've talked about this in around about that we're trying to deal with infinite matters with finite minds. So there comes a point where we can ask questions and try to take things apart, but there also comes a point where things just don't quite make sense because we're human. And then at that point, at least what I've done is I just hand that over to God. And this might be related. And I forget where I got this. It might have been from Don Craybill, but it was somewhere where the Amish are very reticent to take on an evangelical flavor in their theology by saying that they have a personal relationship with Jesus, or that they know that they're going to heaven, because they say, that's not up to us.
Yeah.
Now, and so they kind of say judgment is up to God now, but they are also, they can be judgmental in their own community by the ban and the excommunication, but when it comes to God, that's, so they're not, they would argue that they're trying to be humble, and they would say it's a bit arrogant to
To
say,
say that you're saved.
yeah, to say that they're saved.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
said, no, we can't,
Yeah.
so, and that's just an example. I mean, I'm not, saying that we should be armies,
I'm
but
with you, Karen. When somebody asks you directly, are you saved? That is a real turnoff.
Yeah, me too.
It has happened at our door once when
Yeah.
Paul is just recovering from surgery, and I don't know where I was, but he answered the door in his bathrobe, and it was somebody from a neighboring church.
It's Grace Brethren Church.
Great, yeah, and that was one of the first things they asked him.
Well, that's all they were there to ask.
Yeah, and it's like, can't you see I'm bending over because I have abdominal surgery,
Yeah.
I'm not feeling good, I don't wanna get into this.
There are these people that used to park on my college campus every week that would like run around asking you, like, what percent chance do you think you're going to heaven? And if you say anything other than 100, they like yell at you and they're like, well, then you're not going because it has to be 100%. And like, you would know, this is the whole thing. Yeah.
well, there's a story, and it might have some legend to it because the Mennonites tell this story. It's in the Brethren Encyclopedia, and maybe Ken Morris tells the story, and I forget who the man's name was, but he was a Brethren evangelist, and he was coming back, and he was I think he was in the Philadelphia train station. But he lived in Lancaster County. And someone came up to him in the train station and he had these tracts, brother, are you saved? And Rufus Bucher was his name. Does that ring a bell? And so you've heard this story, right?
No, I don't know.
Okay, so
I know.
Rufus Bucher, he was an evangelist, he looked at him and he says, that's a very good question, and it's one that should not be taken lightly. So I'm just not gonna tell you I'm saved. Better yet, I'm not gonna answer the question at all. I want you to go to Unicorn and,
Go where?
Unicorn, I think, isn't that a
Go to
community
Unicorn, oh, I don't know.
in southern Lancaster County? Well, then he said, go to Quarryville, talk to the grocer,
Quarryville, I recognize.
go to, what's another town down there? And I know Unicorn was in the story, but, go to, whatever, what's down in Quarryville, Strasburg, and talk to the hardware merchant. And then, better yet, go and talk to my wife and my children. And I would be glad,
Yes.
I would be glad to let their answer stand
Yeah.
as my own.
Yeah.
Now, I have put that in a sermon, And I have ruffled some feathers
Ruffled feathers
with that
also.
story.
Yeah, ask my neighbor if I'm a Christian or if I'm.
Yes, yeah, so, and that goes back to what you were saying earlier, picking up on
Yeah.
something John said.
Yeah.
Because John does it, well, he does it some, he doesn't do it a lot, where it's kind of by the manner of our living. And, but see, the brethren, we have worked hard at that, because that's one of the reasons we focus on the Sermon on the Mount. And some people even think that that's our Bible within a Bible, because because the Sermon on the Mount, we read that and say, this is how we're supposed to live. Sermon on the Mount, you know what I mean, it's Matthew 5, 6, and 7. When I say the Sermon on the
And
Mount.
James, isn't that?
Well, and James, you know, Luther didn't like that, he said that was the
Deeds, yeah.
the epistle of straw, because James focuses on doing and on quote unquote work. And in the Church of the Brethren, we have had this kind of discussion. It came up at district conference a number of years ago. It's come up at annual conference. This whole idea of being and doing. And so the part of the church who feels we need to have that personal relationship, and I believe that's important. We do have to have a personal relationship with God and a personal relationship with Jesus. But as you were saying earlier, Karen, it can't stop there.
Right.
And some do say it stops there. That's it. You gotta have that personal relationship, and then everything else
See
doesn't
how it
matter.
can stop there.
And in the Church of the Brethren, you know, some have been criticized with brethren, disaster ministries and all that, that we do too much doing and not enough being. Well, I think you gotta do both, you know, because if we spend time developing our relationship with God, then we're gonna want to be a Christ follower, or at least that's how I look at it.
Just as an interesting aside, at one time, I don't remember if it was a TV documentary or reading or, kind of take the universalist, you know, all you need is 100% certainty that you've been saved and the idea that you have a second chance after life. In Salt Lake City, the Mormons have a baptistry where they have round the clock, you serve and you are in there and you are baptizing people that are dead just by their name. You are baptizing them so that they can join Jesus's family in heaven.
And are these people they've known or just?
Anybody at all, but
They got-
in faith, anybody at all.
They got in
just
trouble
get-
for doing that to
this-
Holocaust victims.
Yeah, no, right, Jews have made it several
Yeah.
times it's come up in Jewish communities
Yeah.
that this was not the faith this person lived.
Right.
You have no right to
Exactly, right.
baptize this person after they're dead, but they have no say in it to make them a Christian.
Yeah.
So.
Well, this is where I would go, you know, that's taking it a little bit too far, because this is up to God.
But you might, you know, you might get assigned to go out and do missionary work in the street, or you might get assigned to spend 6 hours a day for the next 6 weeks. In this chamber, reading the names of dead people to
Yeah,
baptize them.
And
That's,
well, that's.
Who are they to decide that these people aren't already in heaven? I mean, that makes me mad.
Well, maybe it's
Like,
just,
maybe
maybe it's just engineering storage. Paul?
Well, getting back to what you were talking about earlier about doing and
Yeah, being and doing.
There's an interesting verse here in chapter 14,
Yeah.
23.
Uh-huh.
After Judas gives him a question about showing himself, and Jesus replies, "If anyone loves me, he will obey my teaching. My Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him." That's a very comforting thought. And he who does not love me will not obey my teachings.
Right.
And these words you hear are not my own, but belong to my Father, going back to Jesus and the Father being one. But
Chapter 1.
it has, it's the
Yeah.
idea of I think you're talking, the orthopraxy, the doing, when Jesus lives in you, you will do certain things. And it's really kind of cool, that imagery of God being, Jesus is actually gonna come to me and be with me because I'm doing what he wants me to do.
Yes.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and that, I mean, I think that's, well, it could be a number of different, denominations or faiths, but I think that fits pretty well to the Brethren tradition and Brethren belief, you know, and I think it goes back to, what I was saying, we have to have both. You have to have the relationship and then, but that relationship motivates us to obey and to love and to do good things. You know, we need to act out of the heart and try to keep our, negative emotions in check as much as we can and deal with those. And, but open our hearts, which, you know, many of you here at E-Town, this, to me, this is a good place where you see that, yeah. And this is a church that does a lot of things. But in worship and maybe in places like this, we try to figure out what's going on in the text, and we do try to stretch to have a relationship with God. And on that note, I think we're out of time, and let's see, we have one more, statement. I am the true vine, 15. Now, I don't have a whole lot to say about that, so, where we're headed after John. But maybe I'll just do some recap with John, try to bring it all together next time. And then we're gonna look at different translations. And we want to start that by looking at, when the Bible was first translated into English. And it was before the King James Version. King James was not the first English translation. So we'll get into a little history just to set the stage, but then we're gonna look at the translations we're using now. And, what does that mean? Why are they different? How are they different? And so. That's where we're at. See you next time.